Have you ever pondered the effectiveness of the Grand African Summits, where leaders from across the continent and beyond gather the auspices of a foreign leader to be lectured on how to strategize for a better future? Amidst the elaborate ceremonies and eloquent speeches, how often do the promises made translate into actual results? Take a moment and consider the proverbial saying from Rwanda, "The hippopotamus leaves the rivers and lakes to search for dew to quench its thirst." It paints a vivid picture of the African summit's recurrent cycle, grand promises and subsequent disappointments. From the China-Africa Summit to the US-Africa Summit, Russia-Africa Summit, Japan-Africa Summit, France-Africa Summit, up to the recent Italy-Africa Summit, these gatherings have been hailed as platforms for partnership and development, and obviously, photo-taking opportunities. Yet, the reality often falls short of the expectations. In the world of African summits, the grandeur of declarations often overshadows the lackluster implementation. This phenomenon, aptly titled "The Summits of Shame," underscores a glaring gap between rhetoric and reality. Despite the apparent consensus on paper, promised reforms, developmental projects and policy changes often remain unfulfilled, fostering an air of disillusionment. What significant accomplishments can be attributed to the highly praised Obama US-Africa Summit, or the France-Africa Summit, or the UK-Africa Summit? Unfortunately, the impact appears to be meaningless. The Russia and China-Africa Summit does not play a causal role in the infrastructure funding and development on the continent. Whether or not these summits take place, the implementation of these projects would have proceeded independently. The core issue undermining the effectiveness of these summits lies in a structural and systemic challenge: African leaders seeking development in inappropriate places. It's akin to praying where one shouldn't, resembling a form of sheer idolatry. It's comparable to hippos straying away from their natural habitat of the water-abundant rivers and lakes to search for dew to quench their thirst. Failing to tackle this fundamental problem may result in African summits transforming into mere displays, yielding minimal substantive advancements. In the face of these challenges, a glimmer of hope emerges. There is a call for Africa to leverage its plentiful resources and carve out a trajectory towards self-sustained development. Much like China's remarkable development journey, Africa too holds immense potential for accelerated progress. The key lies in shifting the focus and redirecting attention from external assistance towards generating internal wealth by harnessing the immense natural and human resources of the continent. Africa has all it takes for organic sustainable development, without the need for the summits. In practical terms, the extent to which France, UK and Italy, even the United States can effectively assist Africa is questionable. These countries, particularly France, are grappling with significant internal challenges, including a lack of resources compared to Africa, deteriorating economies, and societies in turmoil. Consequently, any support they claim to offer appears to be little more than glorious but ultimately hollow promises, potentially intended to garner favor in the West-friendly media. Sometimes these summits can act as traps, enabling the host to secure advantageous contracts for African resources and garner backing in international forums such as the UN. What it takes is just a contract to get hold of tangible African assets, after which they go to their printing presses and generate dollars or euros out of thin air. African countries have the sovereignty to execute such a strategy. Additionally, these conferences act as distractions and strategies too ingrained in the perceptions of Africans that significant development is unattainable without reliance on euros, dollars, and the broader Western assistance. The issue lies in the fact that lasting development cannot be achieved by consistently depending on external entities and foreign aid. An immediate change is imperative, highlighting the pressing need for African nations to take charge of their own destinies with a sense of urgency and responsibility. In conclusion, the African summits are just a mirage of progress. It stems from the gap between rhetoric and implementation and an over-reliance on external actors, and many of them are predators. The Africa summits resemble a beauty pageant where each host strives to present themselves as the most appealing by showcasing the most impressive plans for the continent. During the recent Italy-Africa Summit, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni asserted that all preparations had been meticulously carried out before the Africans' arrival. She presented the Mattei plan, deemed by her as the most suitable for Africa, without even seeking input or consultation from the African nations involved. This implies that she knows what is in the best interest of Africa. Ursula von der Leyen, the esteemed president of the European Commission, couldn't resist standing up to announce that the European Union had envisioned a more ambitious plan for Africa, earmarking a substantial $150 billion. This allocation made the initial Italian $3.5 billion seem like mere baby steps. One might question why the summit hosts refrained from going above and beyond by pledging a staggering $1 trillion. After all, these commitments are merely promises. Even if the commitment were to reach $2 trillion, true development emerges from within, rather than being externally imposed. Africa has the potential to attain such development on its own accord. While advocating for collaboration and partnerships on a global scale, it is crucial to emphasize that Africa should not be confined to autarky. Effective internal development is a prerequisite for foreign alliances and partnerships to thrive and yield positive outcomes for nations worldwide. Nevertheless, China didn't require China summits for its development. This raises a genuine question: why are African summits deemed necessary? Are there no developing nations in Asia or the Americas? Why don't we hear about Latin America summits, Middle East summits, or Asia summits? Shouldn't these summits take place in Africa, where the actual development is unfolding on the ground? If we give credence to the fact that Africa is the most prosperous continent worldwide, then the paradox of the African summits becomes apparent, wherein an affluent continent, abundant in natural resources, human capital, and a rapidly growing consumer market, begs for assistance from less privileged nations. These meetings could be viewed as the conclaves of contradiction.